Charlie, you had worked at the Detroit newspapers during a time of real interesting decay in some ways, and then you transitioned from looking kind of at this micro set of problems to really covering some of the leading political figures of our time in the last couple of political campaigns.
Yes,
what's this been like for you?
It's funny. I grew up in a small town in Southside Virginia, and I've always loved newspapers and love the idea of exposing wrongdoing, especially with public officials. As Stephen said, we went out to Detroit. Actually, it was in the middle of a strike, and I didn't know what a union was. I guess I'd read about them, but certainly didn't really care about them. And so I went out there as a strikebreaker, also known as a scab, and proudly worked there for about 7 years. But it was fascinating. And then I came here in, actually, I came here 5 days after 9/11, right after my wife and I had our first child, which was sort of a kind of odd timing. But so I come at all of this from I think a slightly different perspective. I went to college and I studied classics and studied political philosophy and have a basic understanding of I would say I studied the founding and appreciate the founding of this country. But really, being here in D.C. for the past 10 or 12 years and seeing the process up close and seeing the massive forces that are at play, and this is what really disturbs me about all of it, is that the farmer that I grew up or worked for as a little boy back home is so much at the mercy of the federal government that for him to build a cow pond, a pond for his cattle to get water from, or a pond in order to use irrigation to water his crops. If he tries to do that and the EPA catches him, he will wind up in court. He will wind up, they will put him out of business. And of course, the big farming operations, that's great with them. They have no problem with that. Major corporations. And in every sector in Washington, no matter what the topic is, it is that person back home who is who should be free to do what he knows is best, is completely left out in the cold and at the mercy of not only the government, a blind government, I would argue, but also major corporations. So that has been sort of what more than anything else has kind of shocked me.
Now, you covered the campaigns of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Do you think that conservatives understand them?
No, largely because, and Stephen, you and I have talked about this, about with President Obama, they're speaking sort of a short line. You know how like, we've had good conservatives who you can speak a shorthand and people get it. And I'm not talking about the dog whistle politics. I'm talking about when you talk about freedom or you talk about faith in a certain way, people understand what you're talking about. Well, President Obama does that very much. When he talks about things, a whole segment of the population gets it and they know what he's talking about and they like him. And clearly conservatives don't get that. And it's been a real problem because they've run circles around conservatives. But one thing that I think is interesting is you were talking about this grinding, this period of grinding that we're in right now. And obviously,
not the first time we've gone through it.
No, it is not. And usually, as you point out, what comes of that, and it's painful at the time, and it seems like nobody is listening, and nobody is listening. Everybody's just shouting. But everyone thinks this is just a really bad time and everybody needs to sit down and listen to Obama or whatever. But what I think is interesting is that what follows that usually is a sort of coming together and someone is able to break through all of this. Well, you know what? The left has had their opportunity, and they had their opportunity with a tremendous, transcendent leader, Barack Obama, and he has totally failed to execute it into anything. I mean, when you look back at this, especially if Obamacare goes the way I assume it will go in 10 years, it will have collapsed. His presidency will have been a total failure. And I say this not as someone who wants it to be, but as just an observer. That he has completely failed to reach anyone that didn't agree with him to begin with. And so it just makes me wonder if that doesn't mean that the next one isn't going to be Hillary Clinton. The next transcendent sort of leader is probably likely to come from a different party. And I may ruffle some feathers here. This seems to be a real hot topic among conservatives this week. But you know, I think that this effort that Ted Cruz has to defund Obamacare by not defunding it in the Senate, which to me just seems sort of crazy. Although if you say that out loud in public, you are pilloried as some sort of traitor to conservatives, and you know. But if you're going to be honest about this effort, it is going to fail, and either Ted Cruz knows that. If he doesn't know that, that's really scary, because the reason I've always liked him since the first time I've ever heard him speak is because he is an adult and he is a constitutionalist. And if you are a constitutionalist and you think that filibustering a bill to defund Obamacare that you asked House Republicans to pass is going to defund Obamacare, you are crazy and you are not a constitutionalist. But as a political statement, I have no problem. I mean, I love the idea that he's bashing Obamacare and all that kind of stuff. But I think that, and when if you read the coverage of it, especially on the right, you know, people are you know, really going after anybody who questions this strategy. But and I think the reason is because, as Stephen was saying, that, you know, for so many people, so many of us, we are so angry about, and have been so ticked off about what we feel like is just the desecration of the Constitution, the you know, utter disregard for everything that makes this country great for so many years that. And we're so used to running around with our pitchforks and banging them on the ground and everything that now, and that's basically what Ted Cruz wants to do, and he's going to make tons of money and get even more followers, which I think is great. I want him to have money and I want him to have followers. But that's what he's going on the Senate floor to do, is to bang his pitchfork on the ground. And if anyone says, hey guys, you know what, we've been banging our pitchfork for 7 years now, and it would be nice to actually do something, I don't know, that succeeds. If you say that, everybody gets upset. They're like, wait a minute, this is what we do. We bang our pitchfork. And it's like, okay, but let's do something else. Let's try something to actually like succeed at something. For example, do the thing where you delay Obamacare for a year. That would be really smart and be very effective. And you know what? And at least make Democrats in the Senate vote for that. Because do you think that Mark Pryor is going to vote against that? And if he does, do you think he might feel a little bit of pain back home? But we're not doing that. Instead, we're just continuing with our anger. What President Obama was able to do, and I actually don't think Hillary is as good at it. Obviously, she's not as good at it. But what he did was he totally, that was a brand campaign. It was, he became an icon, he became a product. You know, during 2008, you know, we went everywhere, you know, and you know, he never talked about, I mean, I found him kind of appealing, actually, especially because the alternative was John McCain. I mean, I didn't vote for him, but I didn't vote for him simply because you know, when you sit down and you make the list of things, I just didn't agree with, you know, his worldview. The government is basically the answer to everything, but he was vague and throughout the entire campaign. But he was able to do that branding and speak that shorthand to all of the little different groups. That it was brilliant. And what's so strange about it now is, and we saw this in the re-elect, but we see it increasingly now on a, just when he gives speeches, he's angry a lot of the time. And he says things that are bitter and nasty, and he condemns Republicans, in Congress as only wanting to, I don't know what it is. They want to kill people or something? Why they don't support Obamacare? Because they're, whatever he says, it's a very pointed, these pointed attacks, and it's so nasty and divisive. And when I sit there and I think of watching the speech that he gave in Berlin, in the summer of 2008, and you're just like, my God, where did that guy go? He's gone. That guy was uplifting, even if you didn't agree with him. You sort of, it was. But he's a totally different guy now that he's had to actually put substance behind that brand, and he finds out that a lot of people don't like the junk that he's filled his empty vessel with.
Charlie, what do you think about the role of conservative media in addressing these stereotypes?
I think you make an excellent point about about the fact that Mitch McConnell and Boehner and crew have actually done a whole lot more than they get credit for. And one of the things that I find myself, and I believe in, tearing into Republican establishment with the best of them. But I do think it's worth noting that under, what Boehner has done in the House in terms of ending earmarks, that is extraordinary. I mean, it's just mind-blowing that there was a Speaker of the House that made that determination after decades and decades of just raping the taxpayer.
And they cut their budgets by 15% without being forced.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the thing that the Tea Party conservatives, and I love these people, overlook is that because John Boehner has insisted on regular order in the House, he has done more to protect the minority. And by minority, yes, we're talking about the Democrats, but the biggest minority, or the most minor minority, of course, are the conservative groups in the House. They are allowed to squall and vote however they want on everything. And it makes it look sort of ridiculous sometimes because they put things on the floor and they don't have the votes, which is a problem. But he has done more to protect that minority than any speaker that I can point to in the past 50 years. So I agree that is that does get overlooked, but I also think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where you still have you can't reason with. A lot of us can't be reasoned with because we feel so burned and so misled and abused because of the good faith that we had in Republicans previously, only to be, I was reminded and often remember, this was back when DeLay was majority leader. I guess this was in the 2003, 2004 time frame, and Nancy Pelosi had gone on some tear about something just crazy talk, and in that way that only she can do, and you're just like, what is going on here? And I remember talking to this guy. He was one of the top guys for DeLay, and I said, why is it that you all don't take out Nancy Pelosi? She's crazy. She's ludicrous. And if you all actually made like a national campaign about what an insane person this is, you all it would be great for you. And he said, oh, Charlie, are you kidding me? She's our best weapon. As long as she's there, they'll never get in the majority. And every time I look at her now, all through her speakership, I kept thinking about that guy and the arrogance of it. And so I think that, you're right. but obviously for a lot of people, you know, we remain really bitter at these people. And these people, I mean the establishment GOP.
So Charlie, I mean, observing these political campaigns and observing the things that you have, what advice would you give to conservatives in terms of building up? What kind of strategies and tactics would you recommend to say, okay, this is where conservatism should be thinking about going?
Well, I agree with Bill and Dan about conservatives are very good at talking about this stuff and sort of coming up with new ideas, and they're intellectually honest by and large, which is something that is pretty well lacking, I think, on most of the other side. And you know, it's people like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. You know, it's a positive thing that they're out there talking. But, you know, I think of myself as kind of a dumb guy. And I can listen to Rand Paul for a certain amount of time. But at the end of the day, you're going to have, what was so great about Ronald Reagan was not just that he was conservative and perfect for that time and everything, but he was a sunny guy, and he told a story. Every time he made an argument, it was a story that he told, and it was a story of freedom, and it was a hopeful, optimistic thing. And he was an actor, and he was good at it, and he appealed to people. Even if you didn't agree with him, you know, it's interesting. You know, today people try to vilify him a little bit. Well, you didn't try to vilify him at the time. He was a very appealing guy, and as much as I like Rand Paul, he doesn't have that sort of. He's a guy you would sit and hang out with. He's not a high arching storyteller. Ted Cruz is a really morose looking guy. When you talk to him, he just seems like sad, and I think that's a very bad thing. And so many people love to make fun of Sarah Palin, and you know, I get it. There's some of the things that she says, it's easy to sort of pillory. But at the end of the day, I remember being at the '08 convention, and it was John McCain, and you're like, oh my God, this is just a train wreck. You knew where it was going. And even if he won, it would have been a disaster. And then he comes up with the Sarah Palin thing, and she came out there and at the convention, and she spent the entire time pointing at us in the press, that, you know, and just used us like a punching bag. It was so awesome, and the way she talked about conservatism in terms of her snow machine was really, really appealing, and it was and she got it, and maybe she didn't really know exactly where Russia was or how far away it was, but I don't really care that much. The fact that she told the story of freedom so hopefully and beautifully, in a way that I don't think Ted Cruz and some of these other guys can. So I guess the end of my point is that, until we find that person, we're going to be spending a lot of time sitting around thinking of good ideas and talking about them.
We're still going to be grinding through the intermediate step. So my takeaways from that is be upbeat, tell the story of freedom, and use the press like a punching bag.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely.
Is that right?
And like we're talking about the gay marriage thing. You know, conservatives or whatever have gotten into this thing where, you know, by being against it, they wind up like denigrating people all the time, which works for that like 20% over here, but it doesn't. It's not expanding.
Talk about energy and the environment. Charlie, what did you think when Bill was talking about climate change? I know you've got a next door neighbor in Chatham who's really wrestling with some real world energy versus environment issues right now.
Stephen's talking about back in the 70s and 80s when the natural gas pipeline was dug from, I think from Texas up to maybe New York, Does that sound right? Marline was the company. Anyway, there's a farm in just outside of town where they discovered uranium. And this was all exciting at the time, but then it sort of, people lost interest when the price of uranium plummeted. It came back in the last 10 years or so. And it's about $10 billion worth of uranium, almost exclusively on one farm. And it's largely at the surface. And it has become this massive point of friction where you have interests from all over coming in, and one of the things and I get the concerns, and I see why people get upset about the notion of mining something even on a single person's property, but I wonder. I've always wondered about whether or not Republicans have sort of, or conservatives, and I don't mean to mix the two, it's just easier to do. If that side of the ledger, if they're not sort of missing an opportunity to talk about being pro-environment, and I'm consider myself a very pro-environment. I mean, I fish, I hunt, I love being outside. I spend far more time outside than I think a lot of these environmental people do. And I love trees. I plant trees. I go crazy planting trees in my neighborhood. It's insane. I mean, literally, my wife has had to have an intervention because I would.
This is a true story. He's had the District of Columbia officials come and ask him to register when he's going to plant a tree or not.
No, it's a real problem, and actually, I got into such a fight over, because sometimes we plant trees on other people's property. But it's like
he's a serendipitous tree planter.
If they're not paying attention and I get away with it, it's not a big deal. And you take a bunch of school kids in the district and say, y'all come around here, and we all dig the hole. Everybody walks by. They think it's so cute. But of course, if I'm doing it by myself, that's when they call the police. But anyway, it's been. But so I consider myself an environmentalist. I like trees more than people. But I've always wondered whether or not the sort of right side of things hasn't sort of missed an important part about being pro-environment or whatever, in terms of property rights. Yeah. Because the notion that I think it's a fair point. If you have a smokestack and a bunch of crud is coming out of your smokestack and it's landing on my property, I'm sort of I have a vested interest in that, and that would be the same as if you were throwing stuff littering in my yard, but like you say, the Republicans have sort of run from that, and it just has always struck me as a very powerful. Like, I should be held responsible for planting a tree in someone else's yard. I think it's totally legitimate that should be illegal. This last horrible episode. I don't know if you all heard, President Obama went and spoke to this. It was a funeral of sorts at the Marine barracks about it. And of course, he launches into the need for gun control. And it was just it was kind of mind-blowing that you would actually do that, politicize something at a memorial service. But that's just, I guess, the manners that some of us were taught. But in any event, I think it's interesting how this is, by and large, other than him, really, there's been no traction in this latest episode for gun control. And of course, the reason is because the guy used the most rudimentary sort of shotgun used for hunting birds, and I mean, it's the last thing you would arm yourself with if you were going to do something like this. And it's it's shocking, the lack of security. It's stunning that he managed to get away with this on a military installation, and one of our good guys wasn't there and able to take him out before he took out 12 people. It's just staggering to me. And then you can't really. What is the argument you're going to make? We need to disarm the military. It's just it in so many ways put a fallacy to what I would say has been the argument after every single one of these things. And while the other issues like the violence and something else that, again, I don't want to tick anybody off, but the business about the psychotropic medications and drugs, while that has not gotten huge play, it has gotten more play now than it has in any one of these other episodes, after that insanity in Colorado in that movie theater, where clearly you had a guy who was on a lot of different chemicals, and but you simply are not allowed to have a conversation about it. I think largely because that medicine is very mainstream. People in my business, a lot of people in my business are on it, and probably the other half ought to be on it. And it's very touchy. You're not allowed to talk about this stuff. And while I certainly I would never dismiss the issue of brain problems and mental, needing solutions to mental issues. Why we're not having a serious conversation about these drugs, and then of course the other thing is the business about the video games, which I also call mass murder simulator machines, and why I would never let my children play one of these things.
You never hear conservative voices really talking about the culture of violence, because it seems like guns and the Second Amendment is like this, and then the culture of violence
because they're so afraid of having the conversation co-opted. And you were talking about how crazy it is that these lines are drawn back in the Stone Ages. Well, thank God they were, and thank God for the states, because if it weren't for states and the way the states are made up, the Senate would, no telling what the Senate, and at the end of the day, I care about two things: taxes and guns, for me personally. And the idea that you would touch my Second Amendment rights, it scares me more than anything. And the only thing that protects me from that is the crazy makeup of the Senate, even though it's the Democrats that control it now. But
well, I mean, Charlie, you would have been pretty much in line with every patriot in 1776, because that's basically what they were fighting the British about.